In a world shaped by the whispers of the past, imagine a time when the very foundations of our modern lives were being laid, not on grand, fertile plains, but on a rugged, rocky landscape. This is the story of ancient Greece, a civilization born from a land that was both its greatest challenge and its most profound inspiration. The land that forged a civilization. Picture a land of jagged hills and steep mountains, a terrain so fragmented it seemed to defy unity. This wasn't a land for expansive empires carved from a single vast plain like Mesopotamia or Egypt. Instead, the Greek mainland was a collection of isolated valleys and a scattering of countless islands. This challenging geography made travel on land a grueling task and communication between settlements difficult. It's no wonder that a single, unified Greek state never truly formed. Instead, hundreds of independent city-states, each with its own borders and coins, emerged. They shared a common language, religion, and customs, yet they were often at odds, their borders a stage for frequent armed conflict. A scarcity of abundance. This tough landscape offered little in the way of resources. The most vital of ancient resources, fresh water and fertile soil, were scarce. While other early civilizations thrived on the rich banks of rivers like the Nile, Tigris, and Indus, only a small fraction of the Greek mainland, perhaps just 20 to 30%, was suitable for farming. Grains like barley, along with grapevines and olives, were the main crops. Though they did have some mineral deposits like iron, tin, and copper for weapons, and limestone and marble for building, they were in limited supply. This general lack of wealth and resources forced the Greeks to look outward. They were, in a way, pushed to the sea. The sea, a treacherous highway. The sea was the Greeks' lifeline. Surrounded by it and separated from each other by steep mountains, the easiest way to travel was by ship. This dependence on the sea led to a constant drive to improve shipbuilding. Even from as early as 7000 BCE, people were using simple boats to navigate between the islands. Yet the sea was a dangerous and unpredictable force. The Mediterranean could be treacherous, especially in the winter months with its sudden storms, and travel was often avoided during these times. It's no wonder that the epic poem Homer's Odyssey describes the sea as a place of immense danger and threat. We date this civilization to the time when the Neolithic period transitions into the Bronze Age around 3200 BCE. The most remarkable finds made by archaeologists on these islands are marble figures. Most of these statues or statuettes depict nude females. These type of statues were created throughout the Neolithic period in many communities around the Mediterranean out of clay or stone. Their purpose is unknown. Most scholars agreed that they probably were used in fertility rituals or as a form of worship of a mother goddess. Usually, these statues and statuettes found scattered throughout the Mediterranean are rather crudely made. However, the ones that date to the Cycladic civilization are by contrast very refined and elegant. They show females with their arms folded across the belly, right arm below the left. It seems that they were painted. Most of them were found in tombs, and their use was probably a ritual one. Remarkable is the fact that a few of the statues discovered on the Cyclades were almost life-sized. The only other places that were creating large-sized statues that early were Egypt and Mesopotamia. Long before the grandeur of Athens and Sparta, a mysterious civilization flourished on a ring of islands in the middle of the Aegean Sea. They were called the Cycladic people, named by later Greeks who saw the islands as a circle or Kyklos around the sacred island of Delos, but their true name remains a secret, lost to the annals of time. This story beginning around 3200 BCE is not one of epic battles or great kings, but of art and ritual etched in marble. The silent sentinels of marble. As archaeologists sifted through the dusty remains of these islands, they found something extraordinary: marble figures. Unlike the rough, simple statuettes made of clay or stone found elsewhere in the Mediterranean, the Cycladic figures were astonishingly refined and elegant. Carved from the pure white marble of the islands themselves, they almost seemed to glow with a quiet energy. Most of these sculptures depicted nude females, their arms folded neatly across their bellies, with the right arm always positioned below the left. Their faces were often featureless, with only a long, slender nose giving them a hint of a human form. A glimpse into the past. The purpose of these figures remains one of the great mysteries of the ancient world. Why were they so carefully crafted and so often found in tombs? Scholars believe they were likely used in fertility rituals or as a form of worship dedicated to a mother goddess. Their presence in graves suggests a ritualistic purpose, perhaps to accompany the deceased into the afterlife or to honor their life. What's truly remarkable is that a few of these statues discovered on the Cyclades were almost life-sized. The only other places that were creating large-sized statues that early were Egypt and Mesopotamia. Long before the grandeur of Athens and Sparta, a mysterious civilization flourished on a ring of islands in the middle of the Aegean Sea. They were called the Cycladic people, named by later Greeks who saw the islands as a circle, kyklos, around the sacred island of Delos. But their true name remains a secret, lost to the annals of time. This story, beginning around 3200 BCE, is not one of epic battles or great kings, but of art and ritual, etched in marble. The silent sentinels of marble. As archaeologists sifted through the dusty remains of these islands, they found something extraordinary: marble figures. Unlike the rough, simple statuettes made of clay or stone found elsewhere in the Mediterranean, the Cycladic figures were astonishingly refined and elegant. Carved from the pure white marble of the islands themselves, they almost seemed to glow with a quiet energy. Most of these sculptures depicted nude females, their arms folded neatly across their bellies, with the right arm always positioned below the left. Their faces were often featureless, with only a long, slender nose giving them a hint of a human form. A glimpse into the past. The purpose of these figures remains one of the great mysteries of the ancient world. Why were they so carefully crafted and so often found in tombs? Scholars believe they were likely used in fertility rituals or as a form of worship dedicated to a mother goddess. Their presence in graves suggests a ritualistic purpose, perhaps to accompany the deceased into the afterlife or to honor their life. What's truly remarkable is that a few of these statues were almost life-size, an artistic feat rarely seen outside the powerful civilizations of Egypt and Mesopotamia at that time. This suggests that the Cycladic people, though living on small scattered islands, were capable of producing art of a sophistication that rivals the greatest powers of their day. And so, the Cycladic civilization remains a silent, yet powerful testament to an early Greek people who saw beauty and meaning, not just in grand monuments, but in the elegant, simple lines of a marble figure, whispering secrets of their world that we are still trying to understand. As the whispers of the Cycladic culture began to fade, a new, more powerful voice emerged from the sun-drenched island of Crete, the Minoans. Their story, which unfolded around 2000 BCE, isn't about humble villagers, but about a maritime empire that controlled the entire Aegean Sea. Though we don't know what they called themselves, archaeologists coined the term Minoan after the legendary King Minos, a powerful ruler mentioned in ancient Greek myths. The palaces of the labyrinth. Unlike the scattered settlements of the Cycladic people, the Minoans built massive structures that modern scholars call palaces. Beginning around 2200 BCE, these architectural marvels were more than just royal residences. They were centers of political, economic, and religious life. Dozens of rooms, sometimes spanning multiple levels, were built around a large central courtyard. These palaces were bustling hubs of activity. Rooms were used for storage, holding vast quantities of olives, olive oil, and grains. The rulers and their families lived in the heart of these complexes, surrounded by servants and the general population who settled in smaller houses nearby. The Minoans even had advanced sanitation systems with drainage and running water. It's believed that these sprawling, multi-level structures may have given rise to the myth of the Minotaur and the labyrinth. The story goes that a half-man, half-bull monster was kept in a complex maze on Crete. The Athenian hero Theseus, with the help of Princess Ariadne's ball of string, navigated the labyrinth, killed the Minotaur, and escaped. Scholars theorize that the palaces were so vast and complex that visitors could easily get lost, inspiring the embellished tale of a sophisticated maze. A society of art and mystery. The Mycenaeans were a society of fascinating contrasts. For a long time, it was thought that they were an exclusively peaceful people. Their stunning frescoes and pottery often depicted nature scenes, animals, and religious rituals, not war. Yet, archaeological evidence tells a more complex story. Daggers, swords, and other weapons have been discovered in their sanctuaries and homes. Additionally, recent excavations have uncovered defensive walls, guardhouses, and watchtowers, suggesting the Mycenaeans were well prepared to protect their wealth and trade networks. The Mycenaean society was matrilineal, meaning wealth was passed down through the female line. While this doesn't automatically make it a matriarchal society, the ruler, Minos, seems to have been male. Women did hold important roles, especially in religion. Their goddesses and priestesses were frequently depicted in art. As a major trading power, the Mycenaeans developed a writing system to keep track of their goods and transactions. This script, known as Linear A, is a syllabic system where each sign represents a syllable. It can be found on clay tablets listing goods and numbers, but it remains largely undeciphered. The tablets themselves have been found throughout the southern Aegean, proving the extensive reach of Mycenaean traders. The preserved town of Akrotiri on the island of Thera, modern-day Santorini, which was buried in a volcanic eruption, provides a unique glimpse into a bustling Mycenaean trading center, with its frescoes, drainage systems, and paved streets still intact. The Mycenaean civilization, though not Greek in the truest sense, laid the groundwork for the earliest Greek culture, the Mycenaeans. Around 1400 BCE, the Mycenaeans came to dominate Crete. It wasn't a single violent invasion, but rather a gradual shift in power, likely aided by natural disasters, like the volcanic eruption on Thera and its resulting tsunami, which may have weakened the Mycenaean Empire. From the elegant, peaceful halls of the Minoans, a new and powerful force emerged on the mainland of Greece, the Mycenaeans. They are considered the first true Greeks, and their story is one of war and wealth, a tale so grand it was immortalized in epic poems. Much like the Minoans, we don't know what they called themselves, but scholars named their civilization after Mycene, a city described by Homer as the seat of the powerful king Agamemnon, who led the Greek forces in the Trojan War. The city of Homer's king. At the end of the 19th century, archaeologists unearthed the remains of Mycene on the Peloponnese Peninsula. What they found was a city of immense power and wealth, fortified by massive stone walls, so large that later Greeks believed they must have been built by the mythical Cyclops. A passionate, though not formally trained archaeologist named Heinrich Schliemann led the most famous excavations. He was obsessed with proving that Homer's epic poems were based on historical events. In Mycene, he discovered deep shaft tombs filled with treasures. golden necklaces, silver vessels, and bronze weapons. Schliemann, in his eagerness, claimed he had found the tomb of King Agamemnon himself, while later analysis proved the artifacts were centuries older than the legendary king. Schliemann's discoveries were a sensation, captivating the world and confirming that the ancient cities of Mycenae and Troy were real places. The first Greek language. The Mycenaeans didn't just build impressive cities, they also left behind the earliest known form of the Greek language. This script, called Linear B, was deciphered in the 1950s, revealing it to be an archaic form of Greek. This discovery helped prove that the Mycenaeans were indeed the first people to speak and write what we now call Greek. The Greek language belongs to the vast Indo-European language family, a group of languages believed to have spread across Europe and Asia through the migration of various peoples. Scholars believe that an early Greek-speaking people gradually migrated to the Greek mainland around 2000 BCE, a slow movement rather than a violent invasion. This peaceful transition is supported by the fact that the Minoan Linear A and Mycenaean Linear B scripts coexisted for a long time on Crete before the Greek language finally became dominant. The Mycenaean period, which lasted from roughly 1600 BCE to 1200 BCE, marks the beginning of Greek culture. It was a civilization that didn't just conquer its predecessors, but absorbed and adapted their ways, setting the stage for the classical Greek world we know today. After a long and prosperous reign, the mighty Mycenaean civilization began to unravel. Around 1200 BCE, a great catastrophe swept across the eastern Mediterranean and the Near East. This tumultuous era, now known as the Late Bronze Age collapse, was a period of immense change, marking the end of one age and the dawn of another. For centuries, chaos reigned, and the brilliant light of the Mycenaean world dimmed. Archaeological evidence paints a picture of a civilization preparing for the worst. Massive fortifications were strengthened around cities like Mycenae and Tiryns, suggesting they were bracing for an attack. But who were the attackers? Was it an external foe, or was it an internal struggle for power and dwindling resources? The truth is lost to time, but the result was the same. The Mycenaean world was shattered. Many people were displaced, forced to flee their homes and become raiders. The once thriving trading networks that connected the Mycenaeans to places as far away as Spain and Libya collapsed, their products no longer found in distant lands. With the disappearance of this massive trading network, the Linear B script, used primarily for administrative and economic records, vanished. It was a complex system known only to a small group of scribes, and once its main purpose was gone, so too was the ability to read and write. For this reason, the period that followed, from around 1200 to 800 BCE, is often called the Dark Ages of Greek history. While a bleak term, it's more of a reflection of our lack of written records than a complete cultural void. Modern historians are increasingly calling it the Iron Age, as this was the period when iron production became a pivotal new technology. The dawn of the Iron Age changed everything. Unlike bronze, iron requires extremely high temperatures to forge, which was only achievable with charcoal. This new technology, first used for weapons like swords and daggers, quickly transitioned into everyday life, revolutionizing agriculture with stronger, more durable tools. The poets of the time, like Hesiod, saw this new age of iron as a sign of decay, a time of warfare, injustice, and strife, a stark contrast to the mythical golden age of the past. Despite the lack of written records, the Greeks kept their history alive through oral tradition,
passing down myths and legends for generations. Wandering singers, or bards, recited tales of gods and heroes, which were later written down when a new alphabetic script was developed. Archaeologists rely on another, more tangible source of information from this period: pottery. By carefully studying the style and decoration of pottery shards found in different layers of soil, they can piece together a timeline of the Iron Age. The earliest pottery from the period shows an increase in local and regional styles, suggesting settlements became more isolated. However, as the centuries passed, pottery from this era began to show up in distant lands, a sign the trade was slowly but surely re-emerging. Around 900 BCE, a true revival took place. The geometric period began, marked by pottery overflowing with intricate geometrical designs. This pottery found as far away as the Near East and Italy is a clear sign of increasing prosperity and technical skill. Population numbers swelled, and the Greek world, though changed forever, was once again on the path to a cultural and economic renaissance. Long ago, after a period of darkness, the Greeks began to look outward once more. To restart their thriving trade, they set up outposts all around the Mediterranean, like small islands of Greek culture in a vast sea of foreign lands. These were places of exchange, not just of goods, but of ideas, technologies, and beliefs. Among the most active traders they met were the Phoenicians, a seafaring people from modern-day Lebanon and Syria. The Phoenicians were a crucial link between the old, powerful civilizations of the East and the newly re-emerging Greeks. The gift of the alphabet. The Greeks were an open-minded people, eager to adopt new ideas. This openness led to their most significant acquisition from the Phoenicians, the alphabet. After the disappearance of the Mycenaean Linear B script around 1200 BCE, Greece had been largely illiterate. The Phoenicians, however, had a phonetic script of 22 characters, but without vowels. The Greeks brilliantly adapted this, adding vowels to create a truly phonetic alphabet. This new system was simple enough for many to learn, democratizing literacy in a way that the old scripts never could. Interestingly, the earliest evidence of this new Greek writing isn't on a list of goods, but on a piece of pottery, the cup of Nestor. Found in the young boy's grave on the island of Ischia, this 8th century BCE drinking cup is inscribed with a witty 3-line poem about the cup's power to make a drinker desire Aphrodite. This tiny artifact, a blend of art and poetry, tells us so much. It shows a culture that used writing not just for business, but for art and expression. And it proves that Greek trade had already re-established itself across the Mediterranean. Temples and triumphs. As prosperity returned, so did grand architecture. The Greeks began to construct large temples out of stone, a far cry from the small, one-room wooden structures of the Dark Ages. These temples weren't places for people to gather. They were considered the residences of the gods, each with a cult statue to honor the deity within. These new religious centers, like Olympia, Delphi, and Delos, began to attract worshippers from all over the Greek world. They became pan-Hellenic, open to all Greeks, a crucial unifying force for a people divided into hundreds of independent city-states. The most famous of these festivals was the one dedicated to Zeus at Olympia. In 776 BCE, athletic contests were added to the festival, creating a tradition that would last for centuries. Held every 4 years, these games became so important that warring city-states would declare a truce so athletes could travel safely. The athletes, all wealthy men who had the time to train, competed in events like running and wrestling. They ran distances like the stadion, 200 yards, from which our word stadium comes. They trained and competed in the nude, hence our word gymnasium, from the Greek word gymnos, meaning naked. Unlike today, there were no medals or national teams. Winners received only a crown of olive leaves, a symbol of honor and fame. But this fame often led to more tangible rewards back home, with some athletes receiving free meals for life. It's a reminder that even in ancient times, athletic prowess brought not just glory, but a certain level of celebrity. The legendary wrestler Milo of Croton, who won 6 consecutive victories at Olympia, became a folk hero whose fame was built not just on his skill, but on legendary feats and showmanship. His story, like the rest of this remarkable period, shows a world that was both similar and different to our own, a world that was slowly but surely building the foundations of Western civilization.
During the Archaic period, a new form of society took root in Greece, evolving from the scattered, isolated settlements of the Dark Ages. This new society was the polis, or city-state. These independent and sovereign states, with their own borders and coins, became the bedrock of Greek civilization. A polis was a unique entity, much smaller than our modern cities. Most had fewer than 10,000 residents. They consisted of a fortified urban center and surrounding villages. The urban core contained 2 key features, the lower town and the Acropolis. The Acropolis, an elevated city on a fortified hill, was a place of last resort for residents in times of siege. It was also a sacred space, crowned with temples dedicated to the city's patron god or goddess. At the heart of the lower town was the agora, a large central square. This wasn't just a marketplace. It was the bustling public space where people gathered for everything from political meetings and elections to festivals and athletic contests. It was the nerve center of the polis, reflecting the new, more inclusive nature of Greek society. Within this new society, citizenship, polites, was a crucial concept. For a free man, being a citizen meant having basic legal equality and being treated fairly under the law. This was a radical idea for its time, a step away from the rigid class systems of earlier civilizations. However, it's vital to remember that this equality was a far cry from modern standards. Women were excluded from politics, resident foreigners and former slaves could never become citizens, and of course, a large portion of the population were slaves. Slavery was a deeply ingrained part of ancient Greek life. Slaves who had no legal rights and were considered property were typically prisoners of war. They worked in every sector of the economy, from households and farms to manufactories and mines. The law did not protect them from abuse, and even prominent thinkers like Aristotle justified the practice, arguing that some people were simply born to be slaves. While a few were able to gain their freedom, these cases were rare. The story of the polis, therefore, is one of a society that pioneered ideas of equality and democracy, while simultaneously building its foundations on the stark reality of human bondage. Once upon a time, the Greek people were bound by the rugged land they inhabited. The mountains and difficult terrain made communication between cities a challenge, fostering a world of independent and isolated city-states, or polis. But as their populations grew, the small, often infertile lands of these city-states couldn't feed everyone. A new solution was needed: colonization. This was a perilous journey, a leap into the unknown, torn from family and home. Colonization was no small matter. It was a massive undertaking, filled with dangers from treacherous seas to hostile locals. The Greeks would only embark on such a mission after securing the blessing of the gods, particularly Apollo, the god of prophecy. The leader of the expedition, the Tistis, had the solemn responsibility of founding the new city,
ensuring its defenses were strong and establishing new temples with a sacred fire brought from the original mother city, or metropolis. This process was often marked by a grim reality. The male colonizers would have to find women among the local population, sometimes through peaceful negotiation, but often through violent kidnappings, a practice exemplified by the Roman story of the rape of the Sabaean women. This demonstrates that the Greeks weren't alone in this brutal custom. It was a common, harsh part of ancient colonization. Eventually, these small Greek colonies grew into powerful cities in their own right. Cities like Naples in Italy, Istanbul in Turkey, and Marseille in France all began as modest Greek outposts. The Oracle of Delphi. When faced with such monumental decisions, the Greeks sought guidance from the gods at the Oracle of Delphi. Located high in the Parnassus mountain range, the journey to Delphi was difficult and expensive, reserved mostly for the elite. At Delphi, the priestess of Apollo, known as the Pythia, would answer the questions of kings, generals, and individuals alike. Her answers were famously vague and cryptic, leaving the petitioners to interpret their true meaning. For centuries, people believed the Pythia was a medium through which Apollo spoke. It's been theorized that this divine connection may have been enhanced by hydrocarbon gases seeping from the ground, which could have altered the mental state of those who inhaled them. Delphi became one of the most important pan-Hellenic sanctuaries, a place where all Greeks, despite their city-state rivalries, could come together. It was a crucial center for international affairs, as leaders would gather there to seek divine counsel and share information. The oracle's influence lasted for centuries, a testament to the Greeks' profound belief that the gods played a vital role in their destiny. Among the ancient city-states of Greece, few have captivated the modern imagination as much as Sparta. Known for its fierce warriors and austere lifestyle, Sparta's story is one of a society uniquely shaped by its geography, its neighbors, and its own ironclad laws. The land of the Lacedaemonians. Sparta was not a city built on fertile plains, but in a valley between rugged mountains in the southeastern Peloponnese. This location made it difficult to attack, particularly from the sea, as its harbor was miles away and plagued by strong currents. This geographic reality pushed the Spartans to become masters of the land, a decision that would lead them to dominate much of the Greek world. The Spartans' unique society was forged by two major conflicts. First, the Dorian invasion around 950 BCE led them to conquer the local inhabitants, enslaving them as helots. Then, a century later, they conquered the neighboring region of Messenia. The helots, who vastly outnumbered the Spartans, and the rebellious Messenians posed a constant looming threat. To survive, the Spartans developed a single-minded focus on military strength, creating a society unlike any other. The unrelenting Spartan way. From birth, a Spartan's life was dedicated to the state. Infants were inspected by officials and, if deemed weak or sickly, were left to die. At age 7, boys were taken from their families and began a brutal state-sponsored education. They were organized into herds and trained in obedience, group solidarity, and military skills. They were forced to walk barefoot, wear a single coat year-round, and were kept constantly hungry to encourage them to steal food and to be punished harshly if caught. These harsh tactics were designed to make them stealthy and resilient. This singular focus on brevity and discipline is where we get the word laconic, meaning using few words, from the region of Laconia, where Sparta was located. Spartan women, too, were part of this system. Their primary role was to give birth to healthy, strong boys who would become soldiers. Because of this, they were given more freedom than women in other Greek city-states. They were well-fed, could drink wine, and were encouraged to exercise outdoors. With their husbands constantly in military training, Spartan women were also responsible for managing their households and land. The Spartan system of rule. The Spartans' unique lifestyle was governed by a mixed constitution, attributed to the legendary lawgiver Lycurgus. This system combined elements of monarchy, oligarchy, and democracy. It was led by two hereditary kings, which allowed one to lead a military campaign while the other remained to govern at home. An assembly of 28 elders and the two kings, known as the Gerousia, held the most power, making it the oligarchic element. The democratic element was the assembly of citizens who elected 5 officials called ephors to oversee the kings. Spartan society devalued private property and used iron bars as currency to discourage wealth accumulation. Everything was designed to serve the collective good of the state. This system, which prioritized civic duty over individual freedom, allowed Sparta to become the most dominant military power in Greece for centuries. It's a legacy that has intrigued and divided thinkers ever since, with some seeing Sparta as an ideal state, while others use it as a cautionary tale against authoritarianism and the suppression of individual liberty. Beyond the unique and rigid structure of Sparta, a different form of government rose to prominence in the Greek world: tyranny. During the Archaic period, ambitious members of the elite, often with military backing, would seize power by unconstitutional means, becoming what the Greeks called a tyrant. In this era, the term wasn't necessarily negative. It simply described a ruler who came to power outside of established laws. Some, like the tyrants of Corinth, were beneficial and popular, while others, like Polycrates, were not. The unfortunate luck of Polycrates. The ancient historian Herodotus tells the famous story of Polycrates, a cunning and ambitious tyrant who seized power on the island of Samos around 540 BCE. With a powerful navy, he expanded his rule and lived a life of extraordinary luxury. He even became a patron of the arts, inviting poets and craftsmen to his lavish court. But as his fortune grew, so did the concern of his ally, the Egyptian pharaoh Amasis. Fearing that Polycrates' continuous good luck would provoke the envy of the gods, Amasis wrote a letter imploring his friend to cast away his most treasured possession. He believed this act of sacrifice would appease the gods and avert a terrible fate. Polycrates agreed, and after much thought, he decided his most cherished possession was a magnificent ring crafted by a master artist. He sailed out to sea and, with a heavy heart, threw the ring into the waves. But his luck seemed unbreakable. A few days later, a fisherman caught an enormous fish and gifted it to the tyrant. When Polycrates' servants prepared the fish for dinner, they found the ring in its belly. Overjoyed, Polycrates wrote to Amasis to share his incredible stroke of luck, but instead of celebrating, Amasis immediately broke off their alliance. He knew that such uninterrupted good fortune was unnatural and that a terrible downfall was imminent. Herodotus' account concludes with Polycrates being lured into a trap and crucified, a grim end for a man who believed his luck was infinite. The tyrant's legacy. The story of Polycrates highlights the Greeks' complex view of tyranny. While some tyrants were self-serving and met a gruesome end, many were popular and benefited their city-states by building public works and supporting the arts. They understood that their power was fragile and relied on the support of the people. This tyrant of the Archaic period was not necessarily the oppressive ruler we envision today. He was often an ambitious man who, for good or ill, bypassed tradition to seize control and reshape his city's destiny. While Sparta became famous for its rigid, militaristic society, Athens charted a different course, one that would lead to the world's first democracy. While it also faced the rivalries and social tensions common to Greek city-states, Athens chose to address these problems not through total control, but by gradually allowing more people to participate in government. The rise of a city-state. Athens had been a major settlement in the region of Attica since the Bronze Age. Unlike other Mycenaean centers, it survived the late Bronze Age collapse around 1200 BCE, though it too suffered the economic and social consequences. But Athens was resilient. Around 1050 BCE, a slow recovery began, and Athens re-emerged as the central hub of Attica. The city-state grew, not by sending out colonists like others, but by a process called synoecism, a political living together with the surrounding settlements. This unification was later attributed to the mythical hero Theseus, who, according to legend, fought off monstrous bandits to make Attica safe and unified. This unification of the city and the countryside, however, brought new challenges. The majority of Athenians lived far from the urban center, making it difficult for them to participate in the aristocratic government. As the population of farmers and landowners grew, they began to demand a greater role in governance, challenging the traditional rule of the elite. From aristocracy to people power. In the early archaic period, Athens was an aristocracy, ruled by a council of elite landowners called the Areopagus. Its members were former archons, the city's highest officials who held executive, military, and judicial power. The archons, elected by their fellow aristocrats for one-year terms, held a monopoly on power. This system, however, was ripe for conflict, with rival aristocrats vying for control. The tensions grew so high that they eventually opened the door for a new form of government, one that would change the course of history: democracy. The Athenian experiment in self-governance would be a radical departure from the totalitarian control of Sparta and the ruthless ambitions of tyrants, offering a new vision of what a society could be.
Even though Athens was moving toward a more open form of government, it wasn't immune to the ambitions of powerful men. Around 632 BCE, the city faced a moment of crisis when a celebrated hero, Cylon, attempted to seize control and become a tyrant. The Cylonian conspiracy. Cylon was a popular Athenian aristocrat who had won a great victory at the Olympic Games. Fueled by ambition, he gathered a group of supporters and, with help from his father-in-law, the tyrant of Megara, he launched a surprise attack to seize the Acropolis, the fortified high point of Athens. However, the Athenians were prepared and quickly laid siege to the Acropolis, trapping Cylon and his men. As the siege wore on, the attackers began to starve. Cylon and his brother managed to escape, but the rest of his men sought refuge at the altar of the goddess Athena, believing they would be safe in a sacred space. The Athenian officials, the archons, promised to spare their lives if they surrendered. But once the men left the sanctuary, the archons betrayed their promise and had them all killed, even butchering some who were still inside the temple. This act of sacrilege was believed to have offended the gods. The Athenians, taking matters very seriously, punished the archons and their families. They were exiled, and even the graves of their deceased relatives were desecrated. This event, known as the Cylonian conspiracy, is one of the earliest datable moments in Athenian history and serves as a vivid reminder of two things: the constant threat of ambitious tyrants and the profound, and sometimes brutal, role of religion in ancient Greek society. The gods' influence was believed to be so great that their perceived offense could lead to the exile and desecration of an entire family.
While Athens survived a tyrant's attempt to seize power, it was still a city on the brink of civil war, plagued by growing inequality. The law was in the hands of the wealthy aristocracy, and the common people had little recourse. To address this crisis, the Athenians turned to a legislator named Draco, whose name would become synonymous with severity. The harsh laws of Draco. Around 621 BCE, Draco, an Athenian aristocrat, was given the task of codifying the laws of Athens. He enacted a code that was infamous for its harshness, so much so that his name lives on in the English language as the adjective draconian, meaning excessively harsh. His laws mandated the death penalty for even minor offenses, like stealing vegetables, a measure we would consider extreme today. However, his most significant legal innovation concerned homicide. Before Draco's laws, if someone was murdered, it was the family's right and duty to seek revenge, often leading to endless blood feuds between rival clans. Draco took this power away from the families and gave it to the state. This move, while perhaps intended to prevent a cycle of violence, consolidated power in the hands of the ruling class. Draco's laws were so severe and disproportionately favored the elite that they only remained in effect for about 30 years. Instead of stabilizing Athens, the harshness of his code exacerbated the city's problems, particularly the widening gap between the rich and the poor. The inequality in land ownership became a powder keg, pushing Athens closer to a civil war that only another lawgiver, Solon, could hope to prevent.
To understand the crisis that led to the rise of the lawmaker Solon, we must first look at the problem of land ownership in ancient Athens. Unlike some cultures, the Athenians did not practice primogeniture, where the eldest son inherits all the property. Instead, land was often divided among all the children, leading to smaller and smaller plots that were no longer large enough to sustain a family. The looming crisis. As the plots shrank, many small farmers were forced to take on debt. If they couldn't pay it back, the land would be seized by wealthy aristocrats, and in some cases, the debtors themselves would be sold into slavery to satisfy their obligations. By the end of the 7th century BCE, this massive inequality had pushed Athens to the brink of civil war. Into this crisis stepped Solon, a respected aristocrat known for his wisdom and honesty. He was chosen to be a mediator, tasked with finding a middle ground between the wealthy elite and the struggling poor. In 594 BCE, he introduced a series of comprehensive laws that would change the course of Athenian history. The reforms of Solon. Solon's reforms were a bold attack on the problems plaguing Athens. He immediately canceled all debts and forbade the practice of using one's own body as collateral for debt. This single act freed many Athenians who had been enslaved. To boost the economy, he encouraged the cultivation of olives for export and even offered citizenship to foreign craftsmen who settled in Athens. Perhaps his most significant reform was the reorganization of the Athenian social classes. He divided the male citizens into 4 groups based on their wealth, with the wealthiest at the top and the poorest at the bottom, known as the Thetes. While the Thetes could not hold public office, Solon granted them a revolutionary new right, the ability to participate in the ecclesia, the assembly of all Athenian citizens. This was a crucial step toward democracy, opening the door for the common people to have a voice in government. A legacy of wisdom. After implementing his laws, Solon famously left Athens for 10 years, traveling to places like Egypt and Lydia. It was here, according to the historian Herodotus, that he met the incredibly wealthy king Croesus. When Croesus asked Solon who was the happiest man on earth, he expected Solon to name him. Instead, Solon named several ordinary men who had lived and died honorably. He explained that a person could only be called happy after death, as life was too unpredictable for a person to be certain of their good fortune. This story perfectly encapsulates a common Greek belief that pride and excessive good fortune could invite the wrath of the gods. Solon's laws and his reputation for wisdom became part of the Athenian consciousness. His poems, which served as a form of political propaganda, offered a rare glimpse into the mind of a political figure wrestling with the complex problems of his time. He was, in many ways, the first statesman to use his words to shape public opinion and defend his actions, paving the way for the democratic debates that would define the era to come.
Solon's reforms brought peace to Athens for a time, but they couldn't extinguish the fierce rivalries among the city's aristocratic families. The stage was set for another ambitious leader to rise, and in 561 BCE, that leader was Pisistratus, a relative of Solon who would become a long-reigning tyrant. The rise and fall of a tyrant. Pisistratus's path to power was as cunning as it was audacious. In his first attempt, he rode into the Athenian agora with self-inflicted wounds, claiming to have been attacked. The gullible Athenians, feeling sorry for their war hero, granted him a bodyguard. Using these men, he seized the Acropolis and became the city's ruler. However, the rival aristocratic families, seeing their power threatened, united and forced him into exile after just 5 years. His second return was even more theatrical. In a brilliant political stunt, he found a tall woman and dressed her as the goddess Athena. Riding into Athens on a chariot with the goddess by his side, he spread the rumor that Athena herself was bringing him back. The people, either believing the ruse or simply impressed by the spectacle, welcomed him back as their tyrant. This second reign was short-lived, however, as he soon lost the support of his main aristocratic backer. His third and final return, 10 years later, was a much more conventional affair. He used his accumulated wealth to hire mercenaries and, after a decisive battle, took control of Athens once and for all. He ruled until his death in 527 BCE, establishing a golden age for the city. After his death, his sons inherited his rule. However, after the assassination of one brother, Hippias became a cruel ruler, leading to his eventual overthrow in 510 BCE with the help of the Spartans. This event, driven by rival aristocratic families, would paradoxically clear the way for Athens' next and most important political experiment: democracy.
After the tyrant Hippias was overthrown in 510 BCE, Athens was once again in turmoil. The old aristocratic rivalries flared up, but this time they led not to another tyranny, but to the world's first democracy. The key players in this transformation were two rival aristocrats, Cleisthenes and Isagoras, the father of democracy. Cleisthenes, a member of the powerful Alcmaeonid family, understood that to win power, he needed the support of the people. He promised democratic reforms, while his rival, Isagoras, was a traditionalist who opposed these ideas. Initially, Isagoras had the upper hand, and with the help of the Spartans, he exiled Cleisthenes and established an oligarchy. But Isagoras' unpopular policies quickly backfired. The Athenian middle class rose up, forced him out, and welcomed Cleisthenes back as their leader. With Isagoras gone, Cleisthenes set about his groundbreaking reforms, earning him the title of Father of Democracy. His goal was to break the power of the old aristocratic families once and for all. He did this by reorganizing the Athenian population into new political units called demes. These demes were essentially local districts, a village in the countryside or a neighborhood in the city. Citizens began to identify themselves by their deme rather than their family name, and members of the same deme would fight together in battle, strengthening their bond to the state over their old aristocratic ties. A new system of government. Cleisthenes' reforms introduced a new system of governance based on two revolutionary ideas: sortition and a powerful new council. Sortition.
To prevent political factions, many officials were chosen by lottery rather than election. This system, where citizens served based on random selection, was designed to ensure that no single individual or family could amass too much power. The Boule. Cleisthenes reformed the Council of 400 created by Solon and increased its size to 500 members. This council, or boule, was now composed of 50 members from each of the 10 new tribes, representing a much broader cross-section of Athenian society. The boule was responsible for setting the agenda for the main assembly of citizens, the ecclesia. Cleisthenes also introduced ostracism, a procedure designed to prevent tyranny. Citizens would cast votes on broken pieces of pottery, ostraca, and if 6,000 votes were cast against a single person, that individual would be exiled for 10 years. This practice was meant to check the power of anyone who became too influential. These reforms, which began around 508 BCE, were a radical departure from the norm in the ancient world. They gave the Athenians a unique sense of identity, and this newfound unity and democratic spirit would be put to the test when they faced the might of the Persian Empire, a conflict that would define the era to come.
Beyond the unique and rigid structure of Sparta, a different form of government rose to prominence in the Greek world: tyranny. During the Archaic period, ambitious members of the elite, often with military backing, would seize power by unconstitutional means, becoming what the Greeks called a tyrant. In this era, the term wasn't necessarily negative. It simply described a ruler who came to power outside of established laws. Some, like the tyrants of Corinth, were beneficial and popular, while others, like Polycrates, were not. The unfortunate luck of Polycrates. The ancient historian Herodotus tells the famous story of Polycrates, a cunning and ambitious tyrant who seized power on the island of Samos around 540 BCE. With a powerful navy, he expanded his rule and lived a life of extraordinary luxury. He even became a patron of the arts, inviting poets and craftsmen to his lavish court. But as his fortune grew, so did the concern of his ally, the Egyptian pharaoh Amasis. Fearing that Polycrates' continuous good luck would provoke the envy of the gods, Amasis wrote a letter, imploring his friend to cast away his most treasured possession. He believed this act of sacrifice would appease the gods and avert a terrible fate. Polycrates agreed, and after much thought, he decided his most cherished possession was a magnificent ring crafted by a master artist. He sailed out to sea, and with a heavy heart threw the ring into the waves. But his luck seemed unbreakable. A few days later, a fisherman caught an enormous fish and gifted it to the tyrant. When Polycrates' servants prepared the fish for dinner, they found the ring in its belly. Overjoyed, Polycrates wrote to Amasis to share his incredible stroke of luck. But instead of celebrating, Amasis immediately broke off their alliance. He knew that such uninterrupted good fortune was unnatural and that a terrible downfall was imminent. Herodotus' account concludes with Polycrates being lured into a trap and crucified, a grim end for a man who believed his luck was infinite. The tyrant's legacy. The story of Polycrates highlights the Greeks' complex view of tyranny. While some tyrants were self-serving and met a gruesome end, many were popular and benefited their city-states by building public works and supporting the arts. They understood that their power was fragile and relied on the support of the people. This tyrant of the Archaic period was not necessarily the oppressive ruler we envision today.
He was often an ambitious man who, for good or ill, bypassed tradition to seize control and reshape his city's destiny.
A powerful new empire was rising in the east, one that would soon clash with the burgeoning city-states of Greece. The Persians, an Indo-European people, migrated to modern-day Iran around 1000 BCE. They were masters of archery and horsemanship, and as the great Mesopotamian empires like the Assyrians and Babylonians weakened, the Persians began to forge an empire of their own. The rise of the Achaemenid Empire. The first Persian dynasty, the Achaemenids, was founded by Cyrus the Great. By 559 BCE, he had united the various Persian clans and began a series of military campaigns that would create the largest empire the world had ever seen. The culmination of his conquests came in 539 BCE, when he captured the city of Babylon, an event that led many other territories to submit to his rule. The Hebrew texts of the Old Testament describe Cyrus in a very positive light, crediting him with ending the Babylonian exile and allowing the Jews to return to their homeland. Cyrus's son, Cambyses, succeeded him and expanded the empire further by conquering the wealthy kingdom of Egypt. But the empire's greatest ruler was yet to come. After a struggle for succession, Darius the Great took the throne in 521 BCE. Darius was not only a brilliant military strategist, but also a master administrator. To govern his vast empire of 35 million people, he implemented a comprehensive system of roads, minted new coins, and showed great tolerance for the diverse peoples he ruled. As long as taxes were paid and laws were followed, his subjects were free to worship their own gods. Under Darius's leadership, the Persian Empire expanded to its greatest extent, stretching from northern India to parts of Greece. This westward expansion would soon bring the great Persian Empire and the democratic city-states of Greece into direct conflict, setting the stage for a clash of civilizations and ideas.
Even as Athens was embracing democracy and the Persian Empire was expanding, a conflict was brewing that would pit these two great powers against each other. The spark for this monumental war was struck not in mainland Greece, but in Ionia, a region on the coast of modern-day Turkey. The Ionian Revolt. For years, the Ionian Greeks had lived under Persian rule, governed by puppet tyrants who were often corrupt and oppressive. These tyrants, installed by the Persian kings, would impose heavy taxes on their people, leading to resentment and a growing desire for freedom. Around 499 BCE, the Ionians finally rose up in revolt. The uprising was not a major threat to the vast Persian Empire, but it was a bold act of defiance. The Ionians reached out to their fellow Greeks for help, and while most city-states, including Sparta, declined to get involved, Athens and the small city of Eretria sent a small number of ships to their aid. This seemingly minor act of solidarity would have massive consequences. In a bold move, the Athenian and Eretrian ships joined the Ionians in an attack on the Persian city of Sardis, a strategically important center. They burned the city to the ground in 498 BCE. This act of aggression, a direct slap in the face to the Persian king Darius, infuriated him. After successfully crushing the Ionian revolt in 494 BCE, Darius turned his full attention to the Greeks who had dared to challenge his authority. He vowed to punish the Athenians and the Eretrians for their insolence, setting the stage for the first of the great Greco-Persian wars.
Enraged by the burning of Sardis, the great King Darius of Persia saw a new threat in the west. He was not only determined to punish the Athenians for their insolence, but he also recognized an opportunity to expand his empire and secure its borders. In 492 BCE, he launched a major military expedition led by his son-in-law Mardonius, with the dual goal of punishing Athens and conquering the Greek world. The first expedition. Mardonius's forces, a formidable army and a massive fleet, set out on a long journey. The army marched overland, securing Persian authority over Thrace and forcing Macedon to become a fully subordinate part of the empire. The navy sailed alongside the army, supporting its advance and ensuring Persian dominance in the Aegean Sea. The campaign was going as planned, but as the fleet rounded the treacherous headland of Mount Athos, disaster struck. A violent storm, a fury of wind and waves descended upon the ships. It was as if the gods themselves had intervened. The storm dashed the fleet against the rugged coastline, sinking hundreds of ships and drowning thousands of men. The devastation was so complete that the campaign had to be abandoned. Though the land army was largely successful in its mission to secure the northern approach to Greece, the loss of the fleet was a catastrophic setback. The Persians retreated, their first attempt to reach Athens thwarted not by the Greeks, but by the raw, untamable power of the sea. The message was clear: the path to the heart of Greece would not be an easy one. Darius, the great king of Persia, had not forgotten the humiliation at Mount Athos. 2 years later, in 490 BCE, he launched a second, more focused campaign. After receiving no offer of earth and water, the traditional symbols of submission from Athens and Sparta, he vowed to punish them, especially since almost all the other Greek city-states had already submitted. The fate of Thrace, which had been fully subjugated in the previous campaign, was a grim reminder of what awaited those who resisted. The sack of Eretria and the march to Marathon. Darius's forces, led by his generals Datis and Artaphernes, first set their sights on Eretria, the city that had joined Athens in aiding the Ionian revolt. After a short but brutal siege, the Persians captured and completely destroyed the city, enslaving its population. The same fate, they believed, awaited Athens. On their way to Athens, the Persian fleet landed near the village of Marathon. The Athenians, having been warned, marched their small army of roughly 10,000 men to meet them. They were joined by a small contingent from the city of Plataea, but the Spartans, who had been asked for help, were in the midst of a religious festival and would not join the battle for 10 days. Outnumbered by a Persian force of 20,000 to 30,000 soldiers, the Athenians seemed to face certain defeat. Under the command of the brilliant general Miltiades, the Athenians held their ground for days, waiting for the Spartan army to arrive. But when the opportunity arose, Miltiades ordered a surprise attack. The battle was a clash of two very different fighting styles. The lightly armed Persian soldiers, who relied on speed and archery, were no match for the Athenian hoplites, who fought in the tightly packed formation of the phalanx. The hoplites, with their heavy bronze armor, large shields, and long spears, were an impenetrable wall. The terrain at Marathon also played a crucial role. The marshy, mountainous landscape prevented the Persian cavalry, their most feared weapon, from joining the fight. The Persians were routed, and thousands were slaughtered. The rest fled in disarray to their ships. But the Athenians' ordeal was not over. As the Persian ships sailed for Athens, the Athenian army, exhausted but determined, made a legendary dash. They ran the roughly 25 miles from Marathon to Athens just as the Persian fleet came into view. Seeing the Athenian soldiers ready for battle, the Persians abandoned their plan and sailed away. This heroic run is still commemorated in the modern marathon race. For Athens, the victory at Marathon was more than a battle won. It was a turning point in history. It proved that the mighty Persian Empire could be defeated, and it gave the Athenians a surge of confidence and a profound belief in their new political system.
The victory would fuel a golden age of democratic and cultural development in Athens and show the other Greek city-states what could be achieved through unity. For Darius, however, the defeat was merely a setback, and he immediately began planning a third, even larger campaign. The war was far from over. King Darius's dream of conquering Greece was not forgotten. His son, Xerxes, took the throne in 486 BCE and, after suppressing revolts in Egypt and Babylon, began to prepare for an invasion of a scale unseen in the ancient world. The preparations for Xerxes' campaign were a testament to Persian ambition. He had a canal dug through the Athos Peninsula to prevent a repeat of the shipwreck that had destroyed the first invasion fleet. Along the route, supply depots were built to provision the massive army. Most impressively, floating bridges were constructed across the Hellespont, the narrow strait separating Asia from Europe. The first bridge, a symbol of Persian might, was destroyed by a storm, an act that so enraged Xerxes that he had the water whipped and fetters thrown into it, displaying a hubris that the Greeks believed the gods would punish. Xerxes' army was a truly cosmopolitan force, a United Nations of the ancient world. It included soldiers from across the vast Persian Empire: Phoenicians, Assyrians, Egyptians, Indians, Macedonians, and even Greeks. While exact numbers are unknown, it was certainly one of the largest military expeditions ever assembled. The sheer size of the army was a psychological weapon, and many Greek city-states, intimidated by the spectacle, surrendered without a fight. The stand at Thermopylae. Despite the odds, a coalition of Greek city-states, led by Athens and Sparta, united to resist the Persian advance. Their strategy was simple: delay the Persian army at a narrow pass called Thermopylae, Hot Gates, while their navy confronted the Persian fleet at Artemisium. The Greek force at Thermopylae, commanded by the Spartan king Leonidas, was small, between 5,000 and 7,000 men. Among them were Leonidas's elite bodyguard of 300 Spartans, a small force that had been sent because the main Spartan army was engaged in a religious festival. Leonidas and his men knew they would not return. For 2 to 3 days, the Greeks held their ground, using the narrow terrain to their advantage. The heavy armor and tight formation of their hoplite phalanx were a perfect counter to the lightly armed Persian infantry. The Persians, unable to use their superior numbers, suffered massive casualties. But the stalemate was broken by a traitor who showed the Persians a hidden mountain path. Leonidas, learning of the betrayal, sent most of his forces away, leaving only his 300 Spartans and a few hundred other volunteers to hold the pass. They fought to the last man, dying a heroic death that would become legendary. Herodotus claimed Xerxes was so enraged by the loss of his brothers and the immense casualties that he had Leonidas's body decapitated and impaled, a gruesome act that went against Persian custom. The bravery of the defenders was immortalized in a simple but powerful inscription: "Go, stranger, and tell the Lacedaemonians that here we lie, obedient to their commands." The naval battle at Artemisium. While the land battle raged at Thermopylae, the Greek fleet faced the Persian navy in the nearby straits of Artemisium. The Persian fleet was much larger, but it too was struck by storms, which wrecked a significant number of their ships. The two sides fought for 2 days, suffering similar losses. However, when the Greek fleet learned of the defeat at Thermopylae, they knew that position was no longer tenable. They retreated to the island of Salamis to regroup and prepare for the next stage of the war. The heroic stand at Thermopylae had bought the Greeks precious time, but it had not stopped the Persian advance. Athens was now a city in peril. After their heroic stand at Thermopylae, the Greek forces faced a grim new reality. The Persian army, now unopposed, marched on Athens, burning every city that had not submitted to Xerxes along the way.
News of the impending destruction reached the Athenians, who had been evacuated to the nearby island of Salamis and the Peloponnesian city of Troezen. The sack of Athens and a gamble at sea. In September 480 BCE, the Persian army reached Athens. A small contingent of soldiers made a final, desperate stand on the Acropolis, but they were quickly overwhelmed. The city was burned to the ground, and its magnificent temples were destroyed. From their vantage point on Salamis, the exiled Athenians likely watched in horror as smoke billowed from their beloved city, knowing their homes and history were turning to ash. Meanwhile, the allied Greek fleet, which had retreated to Salamis after the battle at Artemisium, was in a state of debate. Themistocles, the brilliant Athenian general who had convinced his city to build a powerful navy, faced a council of commanders who wanted to retreat further south. But Themistocles had a different plan. He wanted to force a decisive naval battle in the narrow straits of Salamis. Themistocles understood that the superior numbers and maneuverability of the Persian fleet would be useless in such a confined space. He likely used a clever ruse, sending a message to Xerxes that the Greek fleet was disorganized and planning to flee. Xerxes, eager to crush the Greeks once and for all, took the bait and sent his massive fleet into the straits, trapping the Greeks. The Battle of Salamis was a decisive Greek victory. As Xerxes watched from a nearby mountaintop, his ships became entangled in the narrow waterways. The heavier, more durable Greek triremes, with their reinforced prows, rammed and sank the unmaneuverable Persian ships. The Persians suffered a devastating loss, with about half of their fleet destroyed. Fearing that the Greeks would sail to the Hellespont and destroy the bridges his army had used to cross into Europe, Xerxes decided to retreat with a large portion of his army. He left a smaller, elite force under the command of his general Mardonius to finish the conquest. The Athenians, returning to their ruined city, were met with an offer from the Persians: submit, and they could have peace and their city back. The Athenians refused, and in 479 BCE, Mardonius's army sacked and burned Athens a second time. This act solidified the Greek resistance's resolve. A massive Greek army, the largest ever assembled, was mobilized under the command of the Spartan king Pausanias. They marched north, ready to face the Persian army in one final, climactic battle. After Mardonius and his Persian forces burned Athens for a second time, they marched north to the plains of Boeotia, seeking a battlefield that would favor their feared cavalry. Here, they were met by the largest Greek army ever assembled, led by the Spartan king Pausanias. Pausanias, a cautious and strategic commander, positioned his Greek forces on high ground near the city of Plataea. This defensive position made it difficult for the Persian cavalry to attack, leading to a frustrating standoff that lasted for over a week. Neither side wanted to commit to an all-out assault, as they both knew the stakes were immense. The stalemate was broken when the Persians, with their superior numbers and knowledge of the terrain, managed to cut off the Greek supply lines and their access to fresh water. Forced to move under the cover of darkness, the Greeks attempted a tactical retreat to a more defensible position. However, a miscommunication caused the Greek lines to become scattered and disorganized. Seeing what he thought was a chaotic retreat, Mardonius seized the moment and ordered his cavalry to pursue the seemingly fleeing Greeks. But it was a fatal mistake. The Greeks, now seeing their chance, turned and faced their pursuers. Just as at Thermopylae, the heavily armored Greek hoplites proved to be an unstoppable force against the lightly armed Persian infantry. The battle quickly turned into a rout, and the Greek victory was sealed when Mardonius was killed in the fighting. The Persian army was decimated, and the Greeks followed up their land victory with a naval one at Mycale, which effectively ended the Persian attempt to invade the Greek world. A new era for Greece.
The victories at Marathon, Salamis, and now Plataea and Mycale had a monumental impact on Greece. A new unity. The Greek city-states, so often at war with each other, had united to defeat the most powerful empire in the world. They learned that by working together, they could achieve what was once thought impossible: the preservation of their freedom and independence. The rise of democracy. For Athens, the victory was particularly sweet. They saw their military success as proof that their new democratic system was superior to the absolute monarchy of Persia. This triumph fueled a newfound confidence and ushered in Athens's golden age, a period of unparalleled political, artistic, and intellectual achievement. While the Persian Empire remained a formidable power and would continue to influence Greek politics for years, the battles of the Greco-Persian Wars marked a turning point. They not only preserved Greek independence, but also set the stage for Athens to rise as the dominant city-state in the Greek world, with its unique democratic experiment at the very center of its success.
After the defeat of the Persian invasion, the Greek city-states remained on alert. While Sparta led a loose alliance of city-states on the Peloponnese, it was Athens that rose to a position of unrivaled power. Athens's rise was tied to its naval dominance and the formation of a new alliance, the Delian League. The formation of the Delian League. In 478 BCE, around 150 Greek city-states, mostly from the islands of the Aegean and the coast of what is now Turkey, formed the Delian League. They were motivated by the fear of a new Persian invasion. The alliance was named after the sacred island of Delos, where its treasury was initially kept. Because of its powerful navy, which had been instrumental in the defeat of the Persians, Athens naturally took the lead. The Athenian statesman Aristides was a key figure in organizing the league. Members of the league paid tribute, either in the form of ships, equipment, or money, to fund a common defense. The goals were clear: to protect against future Persian attacks, to seek revenge on pro-Persian cities, and to secure compensation for damages. From alliance to empire. Over time, the Delian League's noble purpose began to shift. Athens started to use the tribute from its allies to fund its own projects, including the construction of a massive war fleet. This fleet not only provided security, but also required a large number of rowers, many of whom were from the lowest Athenian social class, the Thetes. This gave them more political influence, further strengthening the Athenian democracy. As Athens's power grew, so did its arrogance. The city began to treat its allies more like subjects. In 465 BCE, the island of Thasos tried to leave the League after a dispute over a gold mine. In a brutal display of force, Athens besieged the island for 2 years, then stripped it of its ships and defensive walls. This punishment sent a clear message to all other members: leaving the Delian League was not an option. In 454 BCE, Athens made its most audacious move yet, transferring the League's treasury from Delos to Athens. This act is often seen as the unofficial end of the Delian League and the birth of the Athenian Empire. Despite the growing resentment among its members, the alliance did achieve its primary goal. For more than 50 years, the Persian Empire never again launched a significant invasion into the Greek world. With the Persian threat neutralized and the Delian League established, Athens became incredibly wealthy. This newfound prosperity, fueled by tribute and trade, was spent on building a powerful navy and magnificent public projects. Yet, despite this shared success, Athens was a city divided. The conflict between traditionalists and reformers, as well as the city's relationship with its former ally, Sparta, created a political landscape rife with rivalry and ambition. Rivalry and ostracism.
The political life of Athens revolved around powerful individuals, not parties. Two men, in particular, dominated the political scene in the first half of the 5th century BCE. Cimon, a military hero who favored an alliance with Sparta and opposed further democratization, and Themistocles, the naval genius behind the victorious Salamis, who championed a more radical democracy and a break with Sparta. This rivalry came to a head in 471 BCE when Themistocles, a man known for his arrogance and lavish lifestyle, was ostracized. Despite his heroic contributions, his unpopular personality led to his exile. He eventually fled to Persia, a move that only solidified accusations of treason against him. With Themistocles gone, Cimon became the most influential politician in Athens. His pro-Spartan and anti-democratic stance was challenged by a new rival, Ephialtes, who argued for more democracy and a definitive break from Sparta. In 462 BCE, a devastating earthquake in Sparta triggered a massive Helot revolt. Sparta, in a rare act of desperation, asked its Greek allies for help. Cimon, ever the pro-Spartan advocate, convinced the Athenians to send 4,000 troops to their aid. But the mission was a disaster. The Spartans, wary of the Athenians' growing power, sent them back home in disgrace. Cimon's public humiliation led to his ostracism, and with him gone, Ephialtes seized the moment. He moved to pass a series of radical democratic reforms that would fundamentally change Athenian government. While still limited to male citizens and excluding women and immigrants, these reforms broadened political participation more than ever before. Ephialtes' most controversial reform targeted the Council of the Areopagus, an ancient institution that had long been a bastion of aristocratic power. He stripped the council of most of its authority, leaving it with little more than the power to judge homicide cases. This assault on tradition so enraged his opponents that Ephialtes was assassinated in 461 BCE. His reforms, however, remained in place, and the struggle between old traditions and new democratic ideals became a central theme in Athenian culture, even inspiring the great playwright Aeschylus to explore the conflict in his famous tragedy, the Oresteia. After the assassination of Ephialtes in 461 BCE, his associate Pericles stepped into the political spotlight. His leadership would define the next few decades, a period now known as the Golden Age of Athens. The wealth from the Delian League and expanding trade provided him with the resources to fund massive public works and to further evolve the Athenian political system. The radical democracy of Athens. Pericles' vision was to deepen the democratic principles first introduced by Cleisthenes and Ephialtes. The result was a radical new system where male Athenian citizens not only had the right to participate in politics, but were also incentivized to do so. Payment for service. Pericles' most popular reform was the introduction of a daily stipend for citizens who served as jurors or as members of the Council of 500. For the Thetes, the lowest class of Athenian citizens who relied on daily wages, this payment made it possible for them to participate in government for the first time. Broad participation. The democratic system under Pericles was based on direct participation. Citizens would vote on issues in the ecclesia, the citizen assembly, by a show of hands, and many officials were chosen by sortition, a lottery system designed to prevent corruption and ensure a wide range of citizens held office. Equality under the law. All male citizens were, in theory, treated equally under the law, regardless of their wealth. However, in practice, wealthy individuals often still held an advantage in court. The role of elected officials. While many roles were filled by lottery, the most powerful and specialized positions were still elected. These included the 10 generals, strategoi, who oversaw military affairs, and the men in charge of the city's finances. These jobs required extensive education and experience, and since they were unpaid, they were typically held by members of the wealthy aristocratic families like Pericles himself, who could afford to serve without a salary. Pericles' influence was immense. Elected as a general numerous times, he was the dominant figure in the citizen assembly, where he skillfully used his oratorical talents to sway the votes of his fellow citizens. The ecclesia would meet about every 10 days on a hill called the Pnyx, where every adult male citizen had the right to speak and vote. The Athenian system of justice also reflected its democratic ideals, with large juries, sometimes numbering over 1,000, ensuring that verdicts represented the will of the people. With the introduction of the daily stipend, these juries began to include citizens from all economic classes, making the legal system more representative than ever before. After the rise of Pericles and the newfound wealth of Athens, the city's democratic ideals extended beyond politics to its very economy. The Athenians had a unique system for funding public works and festivals called liturgy, meaning work for the people. This wasn't a tax, but a mandatory civic duty for the city's richest citizens. The burdens of the wealthy. In a radical departure from other societies, wealthy Athenians were required by law to use their personal fortunes to fund projects that benefited the entire populace. These liturgies were a cornerstone of Athenian society, creating a form of public welfare that was paid for directly by the rich. Some of the most common liturgies included warship maintenance. A rich Athenian would be required to finance the outfitting and training of a trireme crew for a year. Religious festivals. Funds were provided for grand religious celebrations and theatrical competitions, like the Dionysia. Public delegations. Wealthy citizens would sponsor Athenian delegations to pan-Hellenic games and festivals in other city-states, showcasing Athens' prestige. Reputation and reciprocity. While the liturgies were a financial burden, they also served as a powerful tool for social and political advancement. By generously funding a public project or festival, a wealthy man could win the affection of the common people, thereby increasing his influence in the democratic assembly. Some ambitious men would even spend more than the law required of them, using their wealth to build a reputation for public spiritedness. In this way, the liturgy system created a unique cycle of reciprocity. The poor benefited from the resources of the wealthy, while the wealthy gained political capital and prestige from the gratitude of the poor. While some tried to hide their fortunes to avoid these obligations, the system as a whole was an effective way to redistribute wealth and ensure that the prosperity of Athens was enjoyed by all.
In the heart of Athens, amidst the splendor of a city entering its golden age, a striking contrast existed between public and private life. While the city's public buildings were testaments to its newfound wealth and power, the private homes of Athenian citizens remained remarkably modest. Athenian homes were typically simple and functional, built side by side along narrow, winding streets. They all followed a similar pattern, with rooms built around an open central courtyard that was inaccessible from the street. Despite living in an era known for its artistic and cultural explosion, Athenians did not decorate their private spaces with lavish art or luxurious furnishings. The concept of personal wealth being displayed through grand homes was not a part of their culture. The beauty and grandeur of Athens were reserved for the public sphere. In stark contrast, Athens' public buildings were magnificent. They were often funded through liturgies, a system where wealthy citizens contributed to the public good. One such example was the Painted Stoa, a long, narrow building open on one side, located next to the Athenian Agora. Donated by a wealthy citizen, its walls were adorned with breathtaking paintings of Athenian history, including the glorious victory at Marathon. This painted porch became a famous gathering place, celebrating the city's achievements for all to see. However, one project would outshine all others. In 447 BCE, Pericles initiated the rebuilding of the temples on the Acropolis, which had been destroyed by the Persians. This project would become the most ambitious and costly in Athenian history, and its stunning remains, like the Parthenon, continued to inspire awe in millions of visitors today.
Just as we've explored before, many Greek city-states had an acropolis, a fortified citadel on a hill that served as a last refuge and a sacred sanctuary. The Acropolis of Athens was ancient, with the earliest remains dating back to the Mycenaean period. For centuries, Athenians added and altered buildings on this hill, but Pericles' project was meant to eclipse them all. A house for the goddess. After the Persians twice destroyed and burned Athens and its Acropolis, the Athenians began planning reconstruction. But under the leadership of Pericles, the rebuilding of temples began in earnest. In 447 BCE, construction started on the most famous of all surviving Greek temples, the Parthenon, or as the Athenians called it, the House of the Virgin Goddess Athena. This magnificent temple, built from marble in the Doric style, took 15 years to complete and became the most conspicuous building on the Acropolis due to its sheer size and position atop the hill. The Parthenon was a monument to Athens' patron deity, Athena. Inside its spacious hall stood a colossal, 30-foot-tall statue of the goddess, fully armed and crafted from gold and ivory. This masterpiece, created by the renowned sculptor Phidias, was said to be so impressive that travelers wrote enthusiastically about it. Phidias's fame grew even further when he later created a statue of Zeus for a temple in Olympia, a work that would be considered one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. The Sacred Gateway. The Acropolis was more than just the Parthenon. Visitors entered the complex through a monumental gateway known as the propylaea. While the term generally describes any gateway, the one on the Athenian Acropolis was a temple-like structure in its own right, designed to impress visitors and lead them into the sacred precinct of Athena. It was a fitting entrance to a hill that housed some of the greatest architectural and artistic achievements of the ancient world. The most unusual temple on the Acropolis, the Erechtheion, was built later, around 421 BCE. It was an elegant structure that stood in stark contrast to the Parthenon. The Erechtheion's most famous feature was the Porch of the Maidens, where statues of women, known as caryatids, served as columns, supporting the roof on their heads. This unique building housed the most sacred objects of Athens, including a wooden statue of Athena believed to have fallen from the sky, and the legendary olive tree Athena planted as her gift to the city. Near the entrance, a smaller temple, the Temple of Athena Nike, was built around the same time. This marble temple, dedicated to the goddess of victory, featured a wingless statue of Athena Nike, or wingless victory. According to an ancient author, she was depicted without wings, so she could never leave Athens. This symbolized the Athenians' hope that their victories, especially those against the Persians, would forever remain with their city.
Within the heart of Athens' golden age, a bold and energetic spirit permeated not only politics but also art. The victory against the Persians had infused Athenians with a newfound confidence that pushed artists to innovate, moving beyond the stiff, impassive styles of the past to embrace a new sense of naturalism and movement. The evolution of Greek sculpture. The statues of Athens' golden age represented a dramatic departure from the archaic period. The old style, similar to that of the Egyptians, featured statues with a rigid posture, often with one foot slightly forward and arms held stiffly at the sides. Their faces bore a faint, unchanging smile. In the classical era, a new daring spirit took hold. Sculptors began to capture the human form in a state of motion. Figures were given bent arms and a natural shift of weight onto one leg, creating a sense of dynamic energy. This is beautifully exemplified by the discus thrower, a famous statue by Myron that captures an athlete in mid-action just before the release of the discus. This newfound artistic freedom was not confined to a single medium. The temples on the Acropolis were adorned with sculptures, like the Parthenon's pediments, which told the mythological stories of Athens. One pediment depicted the contest between Athena and Poseidon to become the city's patron, while the other showed Athena's birth from the head of Zeus. The art of vase painting. Among the most common forms of visual art from ancient Greece is vase painting. In the 5th century BCE, artists moved away from the geometric patterns of the past to focus on the human figure. They were more interested in depicting the story, the myth, and the action, rather than individual character or detailed facial expressions. These artists, often known by their style or the location of their work, for example, the Berlin painter, were masters of capturing a pivotal moment in a narrative. Vase painting also evolved in technique, moving from the earlier black figure style to the more popular red figure style around 530 BCE. Red figure pottery became a major export for Athens, and these vases provide historians with valuable information about daily life, from clothing and tools to religious rituals and drinking parties. During the Golden Age, Athens became a magnet for artists of all kinds. Pericles' ambitious building projects offered unprecedented opportunities for sculptors and painters. But beyond the visual arts, Athens was also home to great poets and playwrights who would compete against each other in religious festivals, the most famous of which was the Greater Dionysia, a celebration of drama and culture that was soon to become a cornerstone of Athenian identity. In the 6th century BCE, the tyrant Pisistratus sought to solidify his power in Athens. Understanding the importance of public support, he established the Greater Dionysia, a religious festival dedicated to the god Dionysus. This festival served a dual purpose. It allowed Pisistratus to project an image of piety while providing the people with a spectacular form of entertainment. The birth of drama. The Greeks credited a man named Thespis with the invention of drama sometime after 550 BCE. He is said to have won the first drama competition at the Greater Dionysia in 534 BCE, an event that gave us the word thespian. While none of his plays survived, the tradition he began would become a cornerstone of Athenian culture. The festival was deeply rooted in the worship of Dionysus, the god of fertility, wine, dance, and drama. Worshippers believed that through music, dance, and the wearing of masks, they could achieve a state of ecstasis, a Greek word literally meaning stepping out of one's everyday self. This connection between the god and the art form made the dramatic contests a form of worship, much like the Olympic Games were a way to honor Zeus. During the Golden Age, the Greater Dionysia became the second most popular festival in Athens after the Panathenaea. It was a multi-day event that included tragedies. 3 days were dedicated to contests of tragic plays. Comedies. Contests for comedic plays were added around 481 BCE. Dithyrambic contests. In the early days, competitions in music and poetry were a central part of the festival. The festival was deeply rooted in a religious and artistic event, but also a display of Athenian power. Processions during the Greater Dionysia often showcased Athenian military strength, a clear reminder to all attendees of the city's dominance in the Greek world. The plays of Aeschylus are the earliest examples of Greek drama to have survived, and they provide a window into the dramatic competitions held at the Greater Dionysia in Athens. The festival was a highly organized affair, with a set of strict rules governing the contests. Rules of the game. Each year, a city official would select 3 poets to compete, each of whom had to submit 4 plays. 3 tragedies, and 1 satyr play. These plays, staged over 3 days, were a mix of singing, dancing, and recitation, far more akin to modern musicals or operas than contemporary plays. Satyr plays. Named after the mythical half-human creatures, satyr plays were short, comedic dramas that provided a lighthearted break from the serious tone of the tragedies. Tragedies. The main event of the festival, the word tragedy translates to goat song, a term that may have originated from a ritual involving goats, which were sacred to Dionysus. The playwrights not only wrote their plays, but also directed and often acted in them. They were financially supported by wealthy Athenians known as choragos, who sponsored the productions as a form of liturgy. The winning plays were chosen by a panel of 10 judges, representing each of the 10 tribes of Athens. Aeschylus's The Persians. In 472 BCE, Aeschylus won first prize for his play The Persians, a remarkable work staged only 8 years after the Battle of Salamis. The play is set in the Persian court and tells the story of the Persian defeat from their own perspective. Astonishingly, Aeschylus avoids naming any Greek individuals in the play. Instead, he attributes the Greek victory to a collective effort and to the hubris of the Persian king, Xerxes. The playwright portrays Xerxes as a megalomaniac who, by challenging the gods, brought about his own downfall. This narrative resonated deeply with the Athenians, who watched the play from their wooden stands on the slopes of the Acropolis. Aeschylus's genius was not limited to this single play. His trilogy, the Oresteia, won first prize in 458 BCE. It tells the story of the family of Orestes and, in a profound allegorical sense, reflects the political conflicts of his time. The plays show a clash between the old, vengeful gods, the Furies, and the new Olympian gods, who represent a more civilized form of justice. The trilogy ends in reconciliation, mirroring the social and political struggles in Athens between the old aristocratic traditions and the new democratic reforms.
Of the great Athenian tragedians, Sophocles was arguably the most successful. Competing frequently with the elder Aeschylus, he won first prize an astounding 18 times at the Dionysia. Though he is said to have written over 100 plays, only 7 have survived to this day. The Tragedies of Sophocles. Sophocles' most famous play, Oedipus Rex, or Oedipus Tyrannus, is considered by many to be the pinnacle of Greek tragedy. It tells the myth of Oedipus, a man fated to kill his father and marry his mother. Throughout the play, Sophocles masterfully uses dramatic irony, a technique where the audience knows more than the characters. As Oedipus unknowingly walks a path to his own destruction, the audience feels a powerful sense of suspense and helplessness. The play culminates in a moment of shocking revelation and self-inflicted punishment when Oedipus blinds himself for his sins. Another of Sophocles' enduring works is Antigone, which won a prize at the Dionysia in 447 BCE. It follows the story of Oedipus's daughter, Antigone, who must choose between obeying the laws of the state and fulfilling her moral and emotional obligations to her family. Her decision to defy the law and bury her brother, an act forbidden by the city's ruler, makes her a symbol of individual conscience against political authority. The play is also notable for its portrayal of a strong female character challenging a male-dominated society. Sophocles' genius wasn't limited to his writing. He was also a technical innovator in the theater, increasing the number of actors to 3 and the size of the chorus to 15. These changes allowed for more complex plots and richer character interactions, further enhancing the power of Greek tragedy.
While Euripides was the least successful of the three great Athenian tragedians at the city Dionysia, his innovative style would eventually make his plays more popular. He was considered a modern writer who challenged the conventions of drama by focusing on the psychological and emotional lives of his characters. He achieved this by using new music and dance, and by introducing plot twists and shifts in perspective that made his plays feel more immediate and unsettling to the audience. One of Euripides' most famous plays is Medea, a tragedy that explores the depths of a woman's rage and betrayal. Medea, a powerful sorceress, is abandoned by her husband, Jason. The audience's initial sympathy for Medea shifts dramatically when she exacts her revenge not only on Jason's new wife, but also on her own children. This horrific act was designed to test the limits of what an audience could endure. What makes Medea so unsettling is that she justifies her actions with rational, well-structured arguments, a departure from the emotional and passionate characters typically seen in Greek tragedies. Sophism and the power of rhetoric. The intellectual debates in Euripides' plays reflect a new philosophical movement in Athens called sophism. The sophists were teachers who, for a fee, taught students how to be persuasive public speakers. In a city where democracy was thriving and success depended on one's ability to influence others in the assembly or the courts, rhetoric was a crucial skill. The sophists also challenged traditional beliefs about the gods, a skepticism that is evident in Euripides' plays. Unlike Aeschylus and Sophocles, who often used the gods to drive their plots, Euripides' characters are more in control of their own destinies. His focus was on the internal, human struggle, a hallmark of his modern, psychological approach to tragedy. In the late 5th and early 4th centuries BCE, Athens' most celebrated comic playwright was Aristophanes. He was a master of making people laugh by mocking the powerful and famous. Aristophanes didn't hold back. He mercilessly lampooned leading politicians and intellectuals, including the philosopher Socrates and the statesman Pericles. These personal, harsh attacks are a testament to the remarkable freedom of speech that existed in Athenian democracy. Comedy as a call for peace. One of Aristophanes' most popular plays, Lysistrata, was staged in 411 BCE during the height of the Peloponnesian War. In a plea for peace, the play's plot imagines a group of women who, tired of the constant fighting, withhold sex from their men until the war ends. The play not only provides a glimpse into the gender dynamics of ancient Athens, but also shows how comedy was used to address serious political and social issues. Aristophanes' comedies are a treasure trove for historians. By portraying everyday characters like slaves, peasants, and resident foreigners, medics, he gives us a rare look into the lives of common people. While he certainly exaggerated for comedic effect, his works provide a foundational understanding of Athenian society beyond the elite. The dawn of new ideas. Beyond the stage, Athens' intellectual ferment led to new developments in philosophy. Socrates, who was born around 469 BCE, ushered in a new era of thought. He challenged traditional truths and introduced a strong ethical dimension into philosophical inquiry. To understand the context of Socrates' work, it's helpful to look at the pre-Socratic philosophers who came before him. These earlier thinkers were more focused on understanding the natural world, paving the way for Socrates' revolutionary shift toward the human condition. A shift in philosophical thought began in Ionia, a region that served as a bridge between the Greek world and the advanced civilizations of Mesopotamia. The philosophers of Ionia were the first to move away from explaining the world through divine intervention and instead sought to understand nature through reason, logos. The Milesian and other Ionian philosophers. The Milesian school in Ionia was a pioneer in this new way of thinking. Thales, circa 623 BCE, believed that the fundamental substance of all things, arche, was water. His student, Anaximander, circa 610 BCE, rejected a physical substance and instead proposed that the arche was something immaterial and infinite, the apeiron. The last of the group, Anaximenes, circa 586 BCE, returned to a material substance, identifying the arche as air. While their individual theories were later disproven, their method of rational inquiry laid the foundation for future philosophy. Pythagoras of Samos, circa 570 BCE, influenced by the Milesian school, founded a community in southern Italy. He believed in the transmigration of souls and that mathematics was the foundation of all things, with the universe being made of numbers. Xenophon of Colophon, circa 570 BCE, was a critic of the anthropomorphic view of the gods, arguing that they did not look or behave like humans. He had a tendency toward monotheism, believing in one supreme God who created all things. Heraclitus of Ephesus, circa 535 BCE, famously taught that the only constant in the universe is change. He believed that the arche was fire and that a hidden harmony existed within the union of opposites.
The Athenian philosophers, Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. With Socrates, around 469 BCE, philosophy shifted from the study of nature to a focus on ethics and morality. He wrote nothing himself. All we know comes from the writings of his students, most notably Plato and Xenophon. Socrates famously claimed that the only thing he knew was that he knew nothing, and he used a method of questioning, elenchus, to expose contradictions in what others claimed to know. His relentless questioning of authority led to his trial and execution in 399 BCE on charges of impiety and corrupting the youth. Plato, around the 420s BCE, was a student of Socrates who wrote his works in the form of dialogues. He explored questions of justice, love, and the ideal state, using allegory and mythology to explain his ideas. He established the Academy, a school in Athens, in 387 BCE. Plato's famous allegory of the cave is a central part of his theory of forms, which posits that the visible world is an imperfect reflection of an invisible, true world that can be known through reason. Aristotle, around 384 BCE, Plato's most famous student, was a man of diverse interests, from science and biology to ethics and politics. After studying at Plato's Academy for 20 years, he went on to tutor Alexander the Great before returning to Athens to found his own school, the Lyceum. Aristotle's political philosophy, which included the first systematic analysis of constitutions, remains influential today. However, it's important to remember that Aristotle and Plato wrote in societies that accepted practices like slavery, which we no longer find acceptable. They were products of their time, and their ideas should be read within that context.
For a period from 461 to 429 BCE, Athens, under the leadership of Pericles, basked in its golden age. But beneath the surface, a rivalry was simmering with Sparta, a rivalry that would eventually ignite into the devastating Peloponnesian War. The war, which began in 431 BCE and ended with Athens' defeat in 404 BCE, is best understood through the lens of the historian Thucydides, a general in the very conflict he chronicled. Thucydides, the historian of war. Unlike his predecessor, Herodotus, Thucydides saw history as being driven by human nature, not by the gods. For him, the primary motive behind political action was a desire for power, driven by three core human emotions: the lust for fame, philotimia,
the desire for wealth, pleonexia, and most importantly, fear, phobos. Thucydides believed that the Peloponnesian War began not because of a specific event, but because Sparta feared the growing power of the Athenian Empire. The conflict was a protracted affair, punctuated by periods of truce and renewed fighting. The first phase, the First Peloponnesian War, 460 to 445 BCE, ended with a peace treaty. But after a series of provocations, full-scale war broke out again in 431 BCE. Athens, with its superior navy, seemed to have the upper hand. However, a devastating plague swept through the city, killing a third of its population, including Pericles. The disease severely weakened Athens, and their hopes were further crushed by a series of military blunders. The most significant of these was the Sicilian expedition, 415 to 413 BCE, a disastrous campaign that resulted in the loss of a massive Athenian fleet. Persia, which had its own grievances with Athens, provided financial and naval support to Sparta, which was the final blow. The war's decisive moment came in 405 BCE at the Battle of Aigos-Potami, where the Spartan commander Lysander brilliantly defeated the Athenian fleet. Without its navy, Athens was starved into surrender.
The aftermath of war. Despite calls from some of Sparta's allies to destroy Athens and enslave its people, Sparta spared the city, recognizing its past contributions during the Persian Wars. As punishment, Athens was stripped of its fleet, its defensive walls were torn down, and its empire was dissolved. Sparta emerged as the dominant power, but its victory was short-lived. The war had left the Greek world in a state of turmoil. Resentment grew among Sparta's former allies, especially Thebes and Corinth, who were unhappy with their share of the spoils. This led to a new conflict, the Corinthian War, 395 to 387 BCE, which, while not ending Spartan dominance, severely weakened it. In 371 BCE, Thebes finally defeated Sparta at the Battle of Leuctra, ending Spartan hegemony over Greece. As the Greek city-states exhausted themselves in endless internal conflicts, a new power was rising in the north. Macedonia, a region previously on the fringes of the Greek world, would soon dominate not only Greece, but would also conquer the vast Persian Empire. Ancient Macedonia, originally a kingdom in what is now northern Greece, gradually expanded its power while the Greek city-states were exhausted by their internal conflicts. Over time, Macedonia grew strong enough not only to conquer Greece, but also to challenge and ultimately defeat the mighty Persian Empire. The Macedonian monarchy. The Macedonians were ruled by an absolute monarch, and the king's closest confidants were the heteroi, his companions from the Macedonian aristocracy. These men served as his advisors, bodyguards, and elite cavalry, and their proximity to power often led to conspiracies and palace intrigue. The Macedonian kingdom was rich in natural resources, especially timber and grains, which had traded with Greek city-states like Athens. This trade brought immense wealth, which some Macedonian kings used to strengthen their kingdom. Hellenization and military innovation. Macedonian rulers also adopted a policy of Hellenization, absorbing Greek culture, language, and religion to advance their own society. King Archelaus I, 413 to 399 BCE, was a key figure in this process. He invited famous Greek artists like the playwright Euripides to his court and reorganized religious festivals along Greek lines. Most importantly, he modernized the Macedonian military and built roads, laying the groundwork for future conquests. His reforms would later be built upon by his successor, Philip II,
who would go on to consolidate Macedonian power and lead them to a position of dominance in the Greek world. While the Greek city-states were worn down by decades of internal strife, the Kingdom of Macedonia, located to their north, was quietly building its power. The Macedonians, a people ruled by an absolute monarchy, had long engaged in trade with the Greek world, and some of their kings had even adopted a policy of Hellenization, absorbing Greek culture to their own benefit. This set the stage for one of history's most ambitious rulers, Philip II. Born around 383 BCE, Philip II spent part of his youth in exile in the Greek city of Thebes, where he was educated in military strategy and diplomacy by some of the most formidable generals of the day. This experience proved invaluable when he became king of Macedonia in 359 BCE. Philip was a brilliant military innovator. He transformed the Macedonian army into an unstoppable fighting force. By creating a standing army, he implemented a new system of pay and a draft, ensuring a permanent force of loyal soldiers. Revolutionizing the phalanx, Philip equipped his soldiers with the sarissa, a massive spear up to 15 feet long, which created an impenetrable wall of pikes and gave the Macedonian phalanx a decisive advantage in battle. Leading by example, Philip fought alongside his men and was wounded frequently, earning their respect and loyalty. The discovery of his tomb in 1977 confirmed that he had lost an eye in battle, just as ancient sources claimed. With his army strengthened, Philip expanded his power, using a combination of military force, shrewd diplomacy, and even brutality. His ultimate goal was to conquer the Greek city-states and eventually the Persian Empire. In 338 BCE, his forces, with his young son Alexander at his side, defeated the combined armies of Athens and Thebes at the Battle of Chaeronea, solidifying Macedonian control over Greece. Just as he was preparing for a full-scale invasion of Persia, Philip was assassinated in 336 BCE, leaving his 20-year-old son Alexander to inherit his throne and his grand ambition.
Alexander the Great, a world conqueror. Upon becoming king, Alexander immediately moved to secure his position. He ruthlessly eliminated rivals and swiftly crushed revolts in the Greek city-states, using the destruction of Thebes as a brutal warning to any who would defy him. With Greece subdued, Alexander set his sights on Persia, fulfilling his father's dream. He crossed into Asia Minor in 334 BCE with a massive army and embarked on a campaign that would define the ancient world. Conquest of Persia. Alexander won a series of decisive victories against the Persians, culminating in the Battle of Gaugamela in 331 BCE, which effectively ended the Achaemenid Empire. Military campaigns. He led his army through inhospitable terrains, including modern-day Iran and Afghanistan, to secure his new empire. His last major battle was in India at the Hydaspes River, where he defeated King Pontus. However, his exhausted troops refused to march further east. Legacy. After a grueling march back to Babylon, Alexander died in 323 BCE. He remained undefeated on the battlefield, creating the largest empire the world had ever seen. His conquests exposed large parts of Asia to Greek culture, a process that would continue long after his death. Alexander's empire was short-lived. With no clear heir, his generals, known as the Diadochi, fought amongst themselves for control. This led to the emergence of four dominant kingdoms: Ptolemaic Egypt, Seleucid Persia, Attalid Anatolia, and Antigonid Macedonia. The balance of power among these kingdoms ushered in the Hellenistic period, a new era in which Greek culture and ideas spread across the known world. After the death of Alexander the Great in 323 BCE,
His vast empire was carved up by his generals, creating 4 dominant Hellenistic kingdoms that ruled until the rise of Rome. During this Hellenistic period, Greek culture, language, and ideas spread far and wide, influencing regions from Sicily to India. In return, Greek migrants who moved east also adopted local customs, leading to a vibrant exchange of ideas. The Lamian War. Athens loses its democracy. Shortly after Alexander's death, Athens, hoping to regain its independence, led a coalition of Greek city-states in a revolt against Macedonia. This conflict, known as the Lamian War, ended in disaster for Athens. The Athenians were defeated, and as punishment, Macedonian leader Antipater dissolved their democracy, replacing it with a plutocracy, where only the richest citizens held political power. A Macedonian garrison was installed, and Athens lost its independence for good. Hellenistic culture and learning. Despite the loss of political power, the Hellenistic period was a time of immense cultural and intellectual achievement, with new centers of learning emerging outside of Athens. The most important of these was the Museion in Alexandria, Egypt. This institution, a combination of a library, university, and art center, was established by the Ptolemies, Alexander's former general who became pharaoh. Its purpose was to collect every Greek manuscript and employ scholars to study them. Poetry. Poets like Apollonius of Rhodes wrote epics like the Argonautica, while Callimachus focused on shorter, more intricate works. Theocritus invented the genre of bucolic poetry, which idealized the simple life of the countryside for an educated urban audience. Theater. A new form of comedy, the new comedy, emerged, focusing on familiar characters and humorous plot twists. Playwright Menander's work, like Discalus, provides a window into this new style, which would later influence Roman comedy. Historiography. While some historians focused on local events, others, like Polybius, continued the tradition of broad, large-scale history. Polybius's work sought to explain the rise of Rome, a testament to the new geopolitical reality of the era. Philosophy. Athens remained a hub of philosophy, giving rise to new schools of thought. Skepticism taught that nothing could be known for certain, while cynicism, with its famous proponent Diogenes, rejected social conventions in favor of a simple, independent life. Epicureanism sought happiness in the absence of pain, and Stoicism taught that virtue and happiness came from living in accordance with divine reason. Science and medicine. The Hellenistic period also saw major advances in science and medicine. In Alexandria, the physician Herophilus, around 335 BCE, performed human dissections, earning him the title of the father of anatomy. In mathematics, Euclid wrote his Elements, a foundational text that is still used today. The great mathematician and inventor Archimedes, around 287 BCE, discovered the principle of hydrostatics while sitting in his bathtub and used his genius to create war machines to defend his hometown of Syracuse from the Romans. To understand ancient Greek history, you must first know their gods. They imagined their world filled with divine beings, most famously the Olympians, who resided on the mythical Mount Olympus. These gods and goddesses, like any family, had their own squabbles, rivalries, and love affairs, shaping the course of Greek myth and life. The all-powerful Olympians. At the center of this divine family was Zeus, Jupiter, the king of the gods and ruler of the sky. He was not omnipotent like the gods of other religions, but was subject to the fates and even the goddess of love, Aphrodite. He was the guardian of oaths, justice, and hospitality, and his power was symbolized by his lightning bolt. His wife, Hera, Juno was the goddess of marriage and childbirth. She often quarreled with Zeus over his many affairs, which were a source of his power, as each child he had would be loyal to him.
The Olympians, while powerful, were also human-like in their imperfections. Hephaestus, Vulcan, the god of the forge and fire, was the only imperfect god among the Olympians. He was lame and often laughed at, though his skills as a divine smith were admired by all. Aphrodite, Venus, the goddess of love, beauty, and lust, was born from the sea foam after the castration of the sky god Uranus. She held immense power over both mortals and immortals, with only 3 goddesses, Athena, Hestia, and Artemis, immune to her influence. Demeter, Ceres, was the goddess of agriculture and fertility. The seasons were believed to be a reflection of her emotional state. When her daughter Persephone was with her, the land was fertile, but when Persephone was in the underworld with Hades, the earth went barren. Poseidon, Neptune, the god of the sea, was a volatile and quick-tempered god. The Greeks respected but also feared him, as he could cause storms and earthquakes with his trident. Apollo was the god of light, music, poetry, and prophecy. He was also a deadly archer and could be both rational and cruel. His most famous sanctuary was the oracle at Delphi, where his priestess, the Pythia, delivered prophecies. Dionysus, Bacchus, was the god of wine, theater, and fertility. He was associated with ecstasis, the stepping out of one's ordinary self through wine, music, and dance. His celebrations, though wild, were also seen as a way to transcend social barriers and connect with the divine. Athena, Minerva, the goddess of wisdom and strategic warfare, was born fully armed from Zeus's head. She was a patron goddess of urban centers and was the protector of her favorite hero, Odysseus. Artemis, Diana, Apollo's twin sister, was the goddess of the hunt, wild animals, and childbirth. She was a fierce and often vengeful goddess who preferred the wilderness to the city. Hestia, Vesta, was the goddess of the hearth, home, and state. Every home and city had a sacred fire dedicated to her, and she, along with Athena and Artemis, was one of the 3 virgin goddesses. Hermes, Mercury, was the messenger of the gods, and the god of boundaries, merchants, and thieves. With his winged sandals, he traveled between the mortal and immortal worlds and guided the dead to the underworld. Under the underworld and Hades. Hades, Pluto, a brother of Zeus, was the ruler of the underworld and not an Olympian god. He was the god of the dead, not death itself. The Greeks saw him as a pitiless but not evil figure who simply ruled his domain. His realm was said to be separated from the world of the living by the river Styx, and the dead had to pay the ferryman Charon to cross it. A 3-headed dog, Cerberus, guarded the entrance. Hades is most known for kidnapping Persephone, whom he made his wife. He tricked her into eating pomegranate seeds, which bound her to the underworld for part of each year, explaining the cycle of seasons. Unlike the Christian concept of Satan, Hades did not actively fight for souls or torment the dead. He was simply the inevitable ruler of all who passed from the world of the living.